When we create projects, first thing we need to do is choose a template, give our application a name, and then specify a location for the application. Visual Studio will go through the trouble of creating it, making some default references, and doing other preliminary operations. Here are the project templates. We looked at a couple of them, but let's look at them in more detail. Windows application is just a standard Windows-based application. A class library is used to create class libraries for other applications. So this would be a lot like creating an ActiveX DLL in the old version of Visual Basic. Windows Control Library allows you to just create Windows controls. In previous versions of Visual Studio, you could go in and create just a user control, and so this would be that type of a project. ASP.NET Web Application, these are applications that run in IIS. We're going to look at those in greater detail later on. ASP.NET Web Service, this allows you to create web services, another topic that we're going to talk about later on. Web Control Libraries, these allow you to create reusable, user-defined web controls for web pages. So a lot like creating a Windows control, only now it's for the web. A console application are just command line apps. And finally, a Windows service, and these are services that run in Windows NT or in Windows 2000. If you go into the administration tools of Windows, you'll see a services option, and if you open that up, you'll see all of the services that are running, like your print spooler or your networking services. So you can create that kind of a service. This is actually pretty nice for Visual Basic developers because in the past, they really could but couldn't create services for Windows. It could be done, but it was so inelegantly done that a lot of developers didn't do it, and they would just resort to using C++, but that increased the development time. So it's nice that now, using Visual Basic or C#, you can create Windows services as well. Project references, we looked at what we're referencing in our little project. This allows you to use type libraries for different components, exposes their properties and their behaviors. If you add a new project reference, a new reference in your project, something we did not do in our small demonstration, but when you do, you basically can add 3 different types. You can add .NET references, and this will allow you to have reference to one of the libraries in .NET, so you'd have another base class be available to you. COM allows you to reference COM components. And this is important because even though .NET is here and a lot of production systems are being created in .NET now, even though it's not a released product, there are still many, many software applications written in COM that will continue to be used. In fact, that's one of the great strengths of .NET is that you don't need to throw away all of your COM-based applications. So there is a way to view just the COM components and add COM components. When you do that, if you add a COM component to your references, it will actually convert the type library information into assembly information so that .NET can understand it. The .NET runtime isn't equipped to look at type library information in TLB files or anything like that. So it has to have assembly information. When you reference your COM library, it can import it and then turn it into an assembly using a special feature inside. There's also a command line tool to do this, and it allows you to import type libraries into .NET, as well as export .NET assemblies out to having type library information in COM. The other thing you can do is you can actually reference web services. In our brief demonstration, we used the Solution Explorer, and it allows us to look at our solutions and projects hierarchically. Also, we can look at project items. We can look at references, forms, classes, modules, some of those things that we haven't yet used in our application. We also saw that there's a Show All Files feature which will expand out the nodes in the Solution Explorer. Looking in the Solution Explorer, one of the things we can do is add project items. And as we right-click on the project, we'll open up this menu right here, which will allow us to add. When we do that, if we click on the Add option, we can add a new item or add an existing item. So if we have a class module or a form that was created elsewhere, we can actually import it right here, or we can add a brand new one, and it'll open up an interface so that we can add a new form or a new module, whatever the case may be. You can see there are other options for adding controls and components and modules and classes as well in here. The Solution Explorer window features drag and drop capability. So if we had 3 projects open and there was a module in one of those projects that we wanted to put into our first project, we could just simply click it and drag it in. So it does have a nice feature. Also, if we were in the file system and there were a file out there that we wanted to include in our project, we could simply drag it from Windows Explorer into our Solution Explorer window and it would be added to the project. Server Explorer is a window we haven't explored yet, but we will be in one of our next demonstrations. And this allows us actually to go in and look at servers. We can manage event logs, we can manage processes, queues. We can also manage the SQL servers and Windows services by looking at the servers window. We can also manage data connections, and when we work with ADO.NET a little later on, we'll be showing how to use that. The object browser was pretty nice. We looked at that. We learned that there's a shortcut for that. Control-Alt-J will open up the object browser. This allows us to look at so-called type library information. It'll also show items, their members, interfaces, arguments for the different methods that are available. It shows all of this in a hierarchical organization. People who have never used Object Browser may find a lot of this information overwhelming. If you are familiar with using the tool, it will seem familiar to you, even though there is still a lot of the information there that we typically will not use in a day-to-day development environment. So here's an example of looking at the object browser, and there is some pretty useful information here showing different methods, different classes, different constants. And those are pretty useful to us. Integrating with Visual SourceSafe is pretty important because a lot of organizations use Visual SourceSafe to control the versions of their projects. If you're working on an enterprise application that may have a large team working on it, you have 10 different people working on one section of the application, another 15 people working on a different section of the application, it could be very easy for these groups to become out of sync one with the other, as well as people within a group to step on each other's toes when it comes to versioning an application, making sure that the right files are there when they go to build the final version and roll it out. Visual SourceSafe helps that, and our focus in this course isn't on Visual SourceSafe, but I think it's useful to see how Visual Studio integrates with Visual SourceSafe so that you can save your projects in a database. This will allow you to control the versions of your project's files as well as add metadata to your files. So you can mark up your files and say, this is a VB form I'm checking in, and it has the following characteristics. By the way, other developers might want to note X, Y, and Z. As you check in a C# module, you may want to add similar kinds of comments and so forth. You can also look at the history of your project file operations. So what's nice about Visual SourceSafe is it will keep a running history of everything that's going on with this project. You can even build and export reports of your project history and search within the documents and files and so on that are stored within SourceSafe. You can search for specific names or other text. Looking at our application then, our Hello World application we did before, let's see how we could use some source control with Visual SourceSafe here. We've already set up a Visual SourceSafe database. It's very easily done by using the Visual SourceSafe interface. Now that we've got a database installed, we are going to simply add our project to it. So if we go over here to File, Source Control, and now we can add our solution to source control. We could also add our selected project if we wanted to, but we're going to add the whole solution to source control. These are the same menu options we will use in order to open up projects from source control and so forth. So we'll open up Visual SourceSafe. And now it's saying, where do you want to add this? So here's the name of our project, Students 1. We already have a project in here in this default directory called Customers. That's okay. We'll just say Students 1, and we'll say OK. It prompts us to create this directory because it doesn't exist yet in the database. Once we've completed that, our project will return and look a lot like it did before. However, now what we'll see are some little symbols here. That's because each of these files is checked in. So in order to really begin to work with this project, we need to check it out. So what we can do is we can check out the whole solution. Which permits us to check out not only one project, but if we had multiple projects in the solution, it would check them all out. Or we could just get the latest version. If we get the latest version, we're not then participating in the versioning control. If we made changes to the application, those would not be reflected as we check it in. In fact, we couldn't check it in again because we haven't checked it out. So what we want to do is check out our solution. So this is an attractive interface to let us choose, well, which elements do we really want to be checking out right now? For purposes of simplicity, we'll just check out all of them. And while we check it out, we can make some comments. For example, we are soon going to be adding database access to the application. We'll say app. We'll check it out. What Visual Studio does is, as we check it out, SourceSafe puts the files in what's called a working directory. Working directory is a directory on my, for example, my local machine here, where the files are going to be stored, and then all of the changes that I'm making right now to those files will be stored in those local files. They'll then be pushed up to our central database, which could be on the network somewhere, as I check it in. So finally, we can go in here, we could say File and Check In, or we can simply right-click here and say Check In. Again, showing which elements we want to check in, adding comments, and check it in. So now our application has been checked out and it's been checked in.